Alright, mic's on. Yeah, it is. Okay. I'm gonna do recreational drugs objectively explained. The way I'm defining for this video, recreational drugs are mind-altering substances that users take for pleasure, specifically drugs that you take when you're not trying to solve a medical issue. And for the purposes of this video, I'm going to include medicinal drugs that are commonly recreationally used, such as things like benzodiazepines, like marijuana, certain psychedelics, things like that. And I also will not include drugs like Adderall, even if it's not prescribed by a doctor, because that's like a productivity thing. I don't think people take Adderall for pleasure. They do it recreationally, but it's not like for pleasure. It's that they're actually trying to get something out of it just for productivity. So I'm gonna start with the pros, because it's always better to start with the pros, and then I'll move to the cons. One pro that I could think of is a lot of drugs are a social enhancer. And a few examples of this are alcohol and marijuana for some people, and psychedelics, for specifically MDMA. It's commonly accepted that since drugs alter your consciousness, they allow for more free thinking, which can act either as a social lubricant or can sometimes unlock certain thoughts that you wouldn't otherwise have access to under a sober mind. Another pro to these drugs that it's the obvious one. It's weird to even call it a pro. But I gotta put it on here. It's just the pleasure of recreational drugs. So besides the social benefits, recreational drugs are really only good for the pleasure that they bring people. If used in moderation, drugs can be a good way to reward yourself and de-stress after a lot of work, a long day, whatever it is. However, you have to be very careful with this, and this pro is only it's only really a good thing about the drugs if you're very, very careful with it, and I'll elaborate on that a little bit. Drugs are only good in this way. They're only good for pleasure and as a reward to de-stress yourself when they're used in moderation. And unfortunately, most people, I'd actually say that the vast majority of people cannot use recreational drugs with proper moderation, so this benefit is often lost. And the reason that it's lost when you use drugs too much is because when you overuse drugs, they lose their magic, and this de-stressing and rewarding factor is lost. If drugs are used too much, that becomes your baseline, and they no longer serve the original purpose of being elative. I don't know if that's a word, causing your mood, whatever, to elative. I don't know. I think I made that one up. Now I'm going to move to the cons. First con, obviously, is the physical effects. Very obviously, I don't even have to get any data to back this up. This is common knowledge. Habitual use of any drugs has detrimental effects on the human mind and body. This happens with some drugs more than others and in different ways, but the presence of active substances in the body changes how your body works in various ways. Some drugs can even force your body to build a physical dependence upon them, and additionally, detrimental effects vary greatly depending on which drug we're talking about, as I just mentioned. But some of the common detriments, physical detriments from the common drugs are, but not limited to, decreased cognitive function, physical dependence, decreased fine motor skills / reaction time, and causation of certain diseases. For an example, I know overconsumption of alcohol, it can give you liver disease or whatever. I don't know, whatever it's called. It can give you cancer. Smoking weed, smoking tobacco can give you cancer, all that sort of stuff. Whatever. It gives you diseases. And an extrapolation from this point is that the common problem that recreational drugs bring, some more than others, is addiction. There are two types of addictions, physical, at least to my knowledge. I'm not an expert on this. The two types of addictions are physical and psychological, with varying degrees of intensity. Addiction perpetuates the cycle of all the bad things that drug brings that I previously mentioned, such as the decreased fine motor skills, decreased cognitive function, physical dependence, diseases, etc. If you're addicted to a drug, it's just going to exacerbate all of that. And as well as addiction can make the detriments to your quality of life worse, which I'll get into next. So the next con that I'm going to talk about is the detrimental effects on one's quality of life. Recreational drugs can have varying detrimental effects on one's life. There are a few ways in which habitual use of recreational drugs lower quality of life. For one, most drugs are expensive, and a lot of people who quite honestly cannot afford to buy drugs consistently, buy drugs, and they end up blowing a ton of money when they could be using that money as an investment or in other more useful aspects of their life. Second, habitual use of recreational drugs wastes time, and it can decrease motivation to improve your life in other areas. For example, if you're smoking weed all day, you have more of an excuse to sit on the couch rather than make money or hit the gym. Of course, these are generalizations. They're not true for everyone, but for a lot of people, it can decrease your motivation because it gives you something to do all day instead of work. Additionally, abusive substances can commonly hurt your social relationships with those in your life. This is for a myriad of reasons, but I'll give a few possibilities why it could hurt your social life. You spend less time with people because you're doing drugs. You might be inclined to steal/take advantage of loved ones over drugs. If you're addicted, you might be inclined to steal to be able to pay for them. Whatever. I don't know. There's probably more reasons to that, etc. But those are a couple I could think of. And there are probably more ways in which overuse of recreational drugs can harm one's quality of life. But those are just a couple of the common, obvious ones, the biggest ones that I was able to think of off the top of my head. So in conclusion, it never makes sense for kids to use recreational drugs, and I even think that it doesn't make sense for kids to take a lot of medicinal drugs that are commonly prescribed, but I won't get into that today. It's a whole nother debate. As they have heightened detrimental effects on the development of the mind and body. Basically, just the negative physical effects of drugs are worse for kids than they are for adults, because kids are not fully developed. It affects the body more, and it can permanently stunt certain aspects of development. So I will say for adults, as long as recreational drugs are used in appropriate moderation, there aren't significant negative effects. For example, I know this is extreme, but it proves my point. If you're able to do meth once a month, by all means, be my guest. The only catch is that the vast majority of people do not have the self-control to do meth once a month. They get addicted. They don't have the self-control to do these drugs in moderation and to avoid the negative effects. And because of the highly addictive qualities of certain drugs, it's probably better to just stay away from certain drugs, period. But like I said, if you can do stuff in very good moderation, I don't see a real super negative effect. But you can judge that in your own life. If you see negative effects in your own life, you need to step in. I'm not here to babysit you. That's all I got for this one. Thank you.